We're back to the basics, and today we're going to be covering Ishmael's base E.G.O, Snagharpoon. Snagharpoon is a Zayn level E.G.O, has a 19 base and a +4 roll, blunt damage, and 1 attack weight. On hit, inflict 6 bind next turn, on hit, inflict 3 tremor, and on hit, trigger tremor burst. This is pretty useful actually. 6 bind from a base E.G.O, that's actually very useful in case you're fighting something that's way faster than you, or yeah, no, that's about it, but still pretty useful. The passive of the E.G.O is called Compulsion. If your win rate is going to be favored, then you're going to be gaining +2 clash power, and if you're going to be losing the win rate, then you're going to lose 2 clash power, which is a very interesting and very useful passive actually, because if you're going to lose the clash, you could switch to a defensive skill, or you could switch to a E.G.O, and then you won't be losing 2 clash power. Or actually you'll be gaining 2 clash power if you're using an E.G.O. So that's a pretty good passive actually, all things considered. Some negative, but mostly good. If you decide to use this E.G.O, you're going to have to cough up a whopping 10 sanity, 2 wrath resources, and 2 gloom resources, which is not that expensive, but once again, or maybe this is the first time I'm saying this, but base Zayans are usually pretty cheap, costing around like 4 at the average. Maybe some cost 5, but 4 is the average, so they're all a pretty good price. And you're going to have your resistances changed to Fatal to Sloth, Fatal to Lust, and Endured to Gloom, which is pretty bad. Fatal to 2 things, Endured to 1, it's not that good. But most base Zayans, if not all of them, are like this. So, what can you say about it? Not much. Once again, time to rate these E.G.Os once again, and we're starting off with drip, as always. But for the drip of this E.G.O, it's not like it's a bad drip. It's just not unique. It looks pretty much similar to the base ID of Ishmael. Which, I mean, you can say that for a lot of these base E.G.Os, but a couple of them, like Otis and Gregor's base E.G.Os, they make you look a little different, which is great, but this one doesn't. So that one's going to be a whopping like 1.5, which is pretty tragic. For the strength of this E.G.O, it's probably the bottom of the barrel, actually. It has a 19 base with a +4 roll, which makes it a 23, but that is the lowest roll that we've had so far. If you're not including the negative coins, even if you are, some negative coins still beat this. Which is why I'm going to have to put it at a really low, like 1. Yeah, it burst tremor, but that is not nearly enough to compensate for the just lack of anything. This E.G.O would lack anything useful if it weren't for the 6 bind next turn. I guess the tremor burst is kind of useful, and the passive is kind of good. Okay, maybe the price is also pretty decent, but the only thing that it really does great is the 6 bind, which is phenomenal. I am of the belief that bind is better than haste. It might be a hot take, but 6 bind on something, that's very unlikely that it's going to be faster than you, and that's very likely that you're going to be able to clash with it with any of your IDs. Unless you're using like a very, very, very slow one. But even if you are, you're most likely going to be faster than something with 6 bind on it. So that's a pretty useful thing actually. Putting up to like 5 on the usefulness scale? Nah, like 4. It's not quite 5, it's below average by only being able to do one thing, but it does that thing pretty useful. Or pretty good, I suppose. And for that, I'm going to say 4.5. Yeah, that sounds about right. But to wrap her up, all in all, this E.G.O is pretty good at inflicting bind, has alright tremor. Tremor burst is always appreciated, but not like nothing major. It's on most blunt E.G.Os, but it has a pretty decent passive, Compulsion. Get 2 extra clash power in most scenarios. Pretty cheap, but that's every base Zayn. So, all in all, a pretty disappointing E.G.O, but it's got some upsides, but mostly downsides, but that's about it. See ya.